Welcome back to Fuel Your Confidence. Today I want to talk about something that doesn't always look like fear, but absolutely is. And it's a kind of fear that masquerades as responsibility or preparation or just being careful or cautious. And it feels and sounds sensible, and it quietly influences us to make decisions because we're convinced that this fear is protecting us. So let me take you back to my very first book. I wrote it and it was a massive deal. It was so exciting. It was like the biggest project I'd ever done, and I cared so deeply about it, and I didn't rush any part of the process, and it was proofread and it was edited and it was copy edited and then it was proofread again. It was checked 1,000 times. I even had former colleagues from the Herald Sun read it. So I had professional journalists read it after it had already had all of the trimmings that a normal book would have. And I was so scared that there was a spelling mistake or one tiny typo that I paused. I had 700 books sitting in my apartment for 6 months just in case there was a spelling mistake. Like, that is insane. Number one, it was on creative social media marketing. So nobody picks up a book on creative social media marketing to look for a typo. But then even if there is, nobody would care. But I was so convinced that if there was one mistake in the book, the entire thing would be an absolute disaster. So I took no action. I chose to sit on the books, and every time I walked into my apartment, I was like re-traumatized by the fact that they were there, and I was scared, and I got this wave of fear. And it wasn't because I wasn't proud of the book. It was because I wasn't ready. I was so scared that there was a typo, and all of the worst case scenarios just rolled around in my mind, and this paralyzed me. And this tiny possibility that something could go wrong got so loud in my mind that it outweighed every other piece of logic. So I didn't share the book. I didn't allow myself to enjoy the process. I didn't celebrate what I had created. And what's interesting is this fear didn't actually show up as panic. Even though it made me panic, it showed up as logic, because it sounded like, what if there's a mistake? What if someone notices? What if you get judged? What if then, everything is going to fall apart after that? And that's how fear presented for me in this instance. It didn't say, don't write this book. It showed up when the process should have been finished at the most unexpected time in the frame of the timeline. And now when I think about it, the real fear wasn't a typo. The real fear was seen as getting something wrong, because when something is out in the world, you lose control over how it is received, and our fear doesn't like that because there's no control over that part of the process. So instead of protecting me, this fear delayed me. It took my energy, it took my focus, it made me so anxious, it took my time, and it meant that my work was hidden. Eventually, I opened the book. What I did do though is I delayed the entire publication date to get it into stores from 2015 to 2016, and then when I finally did open it, of course, there was no typo, there was no disaster, there was no mistake, there was no moment of humiliation. All of the worst case scenarios that I convinced myself would happen did not eventuate. It was just such a massive realization that I had allowed fear and the exaggeration of consequences to minimize the value of what I'd created. And fear convinced me that being wrong, or potentially being wrong, was way more important than celebrating my success and sharing creative work with the world. And I think that's the cost that we don't talk about enough. Like, fear doesn't just stop action. It shrinks our voice, it shrinks our world, it shrinks our worth. And it convinces us that staying small is way safer than being visible, even if what we're holding on to and what we've created is actually ready to be shared. So I want to ask you this question. Where are you letting fear make decisions for you right now? Are you overprotecting a piece of creative work? Are you delaying something because you feel it isn't ready because you're actually scared of what might happen once it's out there? I did this, and the only thing I did was create more anxiety, more fear, and more worry for myself, and have less trust in myself and the creative process. Confidence doesn't come from certainty. It comes from movement. It comes from taking the leap even when you're scared. It comes from taking that step when you don't feel ready. It comes from going through the humiliating and scary moments, because when you get to the other side of them, you look back and you're like, wow, I've done it. And if I could do that, it means I can do so much more stuff. Or in my case, sometimes confidence just comes from opening a box of books. So don't believe your fear, because it sounds heavy, it sounds intense, and it's really, really convincing. So always question it, so that you don't end up with 700 books sitting in your apartment gathering dust unnecessarily. Catch you next episode.